Thank you very much, moderator, and for the opportunity to speak. Mine is actually to share my experience in terms of using national export strategies as a tool for addressing impediments faced by women in tourism. And this stems out of Uganda's recent, in 2008, formulation of a national export strategy. And in the process of formulating the national export strategy, I did realize that every effort to engender the national export strategy was not being well understood or being well received. And so what I did was to let the formulation of the general national export strategy continue and get completed, but I thought it prudent to actually approach International Trade Center and see if we could write a national export strategy that specifically integrated gender into trade. Because the gender issues that were emerging as we promulgated the general national export strategy were not being responded to. And I kept feeling that gender issues were being lost in the jungle, and I wanted to be able to pinpoint the trees in the jungle and pick out an intervention that will see more women participation, clearer and more visible integration of gender issues in national export strategies. The institution that I had is a department, an agency of government, but we are 50% private sector and 50% public sector in terms of administrative oversight. So I thought that it was an opportunity to begin looking for unique tools that will begin to bring out gender issues as standalone issues for address for purposes of affirmative action. I have a copy of the National Export Strategy for Uganda that is just for the gender dimension. And what came out clearly in the development of this gender dimension is that, one, women were consulted. They were the ones at the center stage in developing the gender dimension of the National Export Strategy. So women NGOs, women associations, women businessmen, women policymakers, women producer groups were all involved in a deeply consultative process by the women themselves to see how they could best be mainstreamed into export trade. The mission statement of this gender dimension is to make the export sector more dynamic and competitive with an increased participation of women. So in the process, sectors were selected by the same actors now who are now selecting for themselves, including initiatives, interventions, and analyses that affected them. And tourism was one of the sectors that was selected. Art and craft and creative industries was the second one. Coffee, because Uganda is 85% agriculture, was one of the sectors also selected because coffee is easily, in my country, a household crop. And inevitably, it's the women who tend it. They tend the gardens, they harvest the coffee, they process everything, but when it comes to selling, they must declare the proceeds. So we thought that we should integrate coffee because it's a household agriculture item. And in the gender dimension, we have begun to implement initiatives that empower the women even along the value chain of coffee and make sure that more proceeds are left in their hands. The fourth sector is dairy, especially looking at the zero grazing hybrid animals and milk, incorporating issues of health, of food, of hygiene, and the possibility that women can actually make good money if they have hybrid animals at home. From the milk, they could be helped to add value and therefore earn more along the value chain. And this does not require land, because one of the biggest problems in the gender issues is land. If the country is 85% agriculture and only 7% of the women have registered land, it becomes a big issue if the sectors and strategies that are being developed are in the agriculture sector, it automatically puts out the women. So the sectors we picked in the understanding and analysis of the women are those that help them somehow to a bigger degree overcome the constraining gender factors that could otherwise emerge in being integrated in export trade. So we find that as we now implement, women's voices are higher and they're able to receive interventions from development partners, from government, from civil society that are gender specific by referring to their own Bible. Again, my experience had shown that most trade-centered initiatives for women were short-term. Normally, not long enough, not deep enough, just kind of touching the surface and not leaving the women at the end of those short programs and projects well mainstreamed into trade. So by having a 5-year development plan that is specific for gender, it comes out as an opportunity to see deeper interventions, deeper integrations that are long-term, more long-lasting, with a longer impact, able to be replicated, brought up, and attended to for women. And in this same context, in the previous meeting, we're actually looking at a project that is the integration of art and craft and creative industries into tourism, and the largest component of the players in that project inevitably is going to be women. And I just said earlier that we have others on women in cross-border trade. Patricia, you're just sharing about the frustrations of cross-border women. And it is known, especially in Africa, market women is a big thing. Market women have educated their children, they have owned homes, they have run the show by being called market women. And similarly, because of this same national export strategy that is gender sensitive, we have another project that we are implementing that is women in cross-border trade. And we're actually addressing gender-specific issues, and it's amazing and even shocking to understand and see the kind of gender issues that cross-border women encounter. So I want to believe that from the perspective of developing special tools, national export strategies and other sector strategies that are gender specific are extremely important. That the impediments that the women would face would be more easily addressed and would be more easily phased out, and we will see more integration of women in business. For the sake of statistics, and I want to believe that this is even reflectable at other countries, especially from sub-Saharan Africa, we are a country that is now, I think, 33 million people, of which 51% is women. And if 51% is women, and only 88.2, rather all 88.2 are self-employed or work as housewives, you can see the magnitude of the gap that is there for them to be left by the wayside when it comes to being mainstreamed into international trading systems. And when it comes to micro enterprises, not small enterprises, but the micro enterprises, women in my country control up to 42% of the micro enterprises. And so this kind of independent picture that we've brought out, where the micro enterprises, they are in artisans, they are in simple micro trading, they are in simple services provision. We're talking about mainstreaming women into tourism. Somebody talked about braiding tourist hairs. I don't know whether the European tourists who come to your countries also go back with African braids and African touch everywhere. So those micro enterprises is where actually we find women more and more involved. So yes, I would like to encourage and suggest that national export strategies could be used as a good tool where the women get consulted, where they participate, where you have special affirmative actions, where you have special critical pathways developed for them to be mainstreamed into export trade, and to have the opportunity to be given capacity to grow from micro enterprises to higher enterprises, because in the process, we find that we train them also in basic business skills, in basic other issues of marketing and export readiness. So I want to believe that this is an interesting and good tool that we could adopt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is very important that Uganda takes women into a center stage and putting the national, international export strategies. And there's a word called women streaming. This is a new word for me. I know about trade mainstreaming, but women streaming is new. And so I think it's very important that the idea is that you have to look in the long term to create women equity and women streaming in that regards into the national plan. Let me introduce Margaret Malua. Margaret Malua is the president of International Women's in Development Incorporation in Samoa. And Margaret will talk about what works in terms of overcoming impediments to move women up the tourism value chain. You have a floor.